Hello, my name is Rebecca Richardson, but most people call me Becky, and today I thought we could talk about some short stories I've written. Now, admittedly, I don't write too many short stories. They're not really like my thing. I kind of struggle a lot with short stories because whereas when I write longer work, I have a lot of room to like mess with different subplots and the plot line and fit everything in. You don't really have time or room for that in a short story, so I tend to struggle with like fitting a decent plot line into the space I have. But when I was at school, every year we had like a writing competition that was run by the town council. It was called the Rotary Club Writing Competition, I think, and people from my school and other schools in the area had the chance to submit their work based on the theme they were given. The people who were shortlisted got to go to the town hall, and there was like a big thing about who won it. And I entered that competition 3 times. The first time I was in year 8, that was like very end of middle school, so there wasn't a theme that year. I then entered again in year 10, I believe, when there was a theme, and then I entered again in year 11. I won this competition twice out of the 3 years I entered. The first time was in middle school in year 8 when I was in like a different category because like the high school students like had their winner and then middle school had their winner and then the first schools had their winner. I won the middle school category for that year and then I won the high school category in year 11. I thought these are just 3 fun short stories we could go over since I'm not really talking about my like bigger work at the moment yet. I thought I could at least show people some of my writing. Not really show it, I'm not going to sit here and read out or anything, that would be horrific, but I'm going to like go over the plot line and things. I just thought it would be fun. So the first of these short stories was the one that I wrote in year 8, which was called The Elf Man. The Elf Man was really like the first short story I'd sat and written, probably the first like story in general I'd like properly sat down to write. I was kind of encouraged to join this competition by my English teacher who like kind of knew that I was into writing and she was like, oh hey, they run this thing, you should enter it this year. And so I just sat down and just really put words on paper. I didn't really think about the plot at first, but it kind of happened over time. The Elf Man is about a girl called April who is basically very bored of her life. The story begins with her on the way home from school with one of her friends complaining about how her life is just so boring and the same thing happens over and over again and she just really wishes things could be different. She finds herself that night looking out of a window watching the cars go by, still thinking about how everything's just so mundane and so like the same thing happens over and over again and how she's just so bored of her life when she notices a little very elfish looking man across the road. At the time she kind of dismisses it, but this man does appear later in the story. April then wakes up the next day to find that she is sleeping on the floor because her bed is on the roof. She quickly realises that what was the roof is now the floor and what was the floor is now the roof and all her furniture is stuck to the ceiling. Obviously she panics and she goes downstairs and finds her parents out there. When she rings them they don't answer the phone, so she goes outside, and it's when she goes outside that she notices that things are definitely not what they were the day before. The one thing that I was told I had to do for this story is that it had to be set in the town of Berwick upon Tweed because that was the town I lived in. That was where it had to be set because it was their Rotary Club. However, I never particularly found Berwick the most interesting town. There was a lot of interesting history, which I almost played off, but other than that, I didn't particularly think there was anything super exciting I could write a story about within the town. So The Elf Man was written as a way for me to keep it in Berwick, but also completely ruin every rule they'd given us, which is kind of a theme that you will see appear again in these stories. So, because I had to set it in Berwick, but didn't want to set it in Berwick, I made it an alternate universe Berwick, because the point in the story is that she doesn't want things to be the same way they were, so she walks out of the house and she's still in Berwick, but Berwick has like a purple sky and all of the signs are in a different language. There's people riding tigers down the road. There's people dressed like elves. There's like talking like lions or something. Everything is very, very weird. The rest of the story then follows her speaking to different people in the town and trying to work out what has happened, but everybody else in the town thinks this is normal. Nobody has realised there's been a difference. You know, the sky keeps changing colour, or it starts raining suddenly, and then the next minute the sky's pink and everything's sunny, and every time she brings this up to someone, they're like, what, this is how it normally is, like, what's up with you, kind of thing. And she is the only person who is aware that this isn't how things are supposed to be. There's other elements to it other than, like, the sky changing. I believe that there's, like, an elephant in the town hall, and the town hall itself is made of gingerbread or something. Like, it's all just, like, I was just throwing things in there. I was, like, 13, just shoving things in. Gingerbread townhouse, like, just shoving it all in there. But it gets the point across, which is that everything is very, very different to how it was originally. Eventually, April finds her friend who she was walking back from school with the day before, thinking that he would in some way know what's happening, and when she's like, oh my god, what's happening, he, like everybody else, thinks it's normal and thinks she's just having a bad day. This is the part when she breaks and starts screaming at him about how things need to return to the way they were and how she really wishes everything could just be normal again and just the same as it all originally was. And when she turns around, she realises that everything has gone exactly back to the way it was the day before, which was the mundane, boring life she first wished to escape. But instead of wishing to escape it again, she's just incredibly glad that everything has returned to how it was and very glad to have her life back. And it's in this moment of euphoria for her that she looks up and sees, sat on a roof, the elfish man who she saw the day before. That is how the story ends. It's never explained why he's there, but the kind of gist of it is that this was like some little magical man who was listening to her complain about how much she hated her life and how boring everything was and how she wished it would all be different. And then he then made a point of showing her a different world, to which she then decided she was very much happy in her own. And that is the moral of the story. It's about being glad for what you have and not wanting things to change because you might not like that change. Quite deep, I think, for someone who is 13, you know, be grateful for all you have. It was quite a bit, but in reality it was just a very nice way for me to take the write about Beric and make it very much not Beric. But that story did win the middle school section for that year. It was like the first short story I'd written. I wrote it at like midnight and then I edited it the next day. So I was quite surprised when it won, but I was also very happy because it's still one of my favourite short stories I've done. The next year I entered was year 10. I don't really know why I didn't enter in year 9. I just think I like missed the deadline or something. I just didn't really want to. So I entered in year 10. And in year 10 there was actually like a theme that we had to stick to. Again, it had to be in Berwick as always, or like in the Berwick area, but the actual theme was living on the edge. Now, another thing about these themes is that they all again link to the Berwick thing. They were all in some way made to make you refer to the town. Living on the edge, for instance, was supposed to be taken as like living on the edge of the country, or living on the edge because it was a seaside town, so you were literally on the edge of the country. But because they never particularly stated that, I was like, nah. Again, this is what I mean by that theme of just kind of taking their rules and completely turning them on their head. It gets worse. This isn't even the worst one. So the short story I wrote for the competition in year 10 was called The Vampires of Berwick-upon-Tweed. The Vampires of Berwick-upon-Tweed obviously were set in the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed, and it followed 2 vampire hunters called Catherine and Matthew, who kind of inspired some of the characters in what eventually became my book series that I'm writing at the moment. So if I eventually start sharing the links for them and anybody reads them, then you will see the names Catherine and Matthew come up. But in this short story, Catherine and Matthew are vampire hunters, and they are tracking down a nest of vampires that they found living somewhere in Berwick. They track this nest to a creepy little, like, backstreet bar thing. A lot of the story is actually them making their way to the bar and the description of them, like, weaving between the people in the streets and going down all of the, like, the dark back alleys to find this bar, and then the rest of the story is the fight. Basically, this bar is filled with vampires because I was like, I just really want to write about people killing vampires, basically. So that was what they did. They walk into a bar of vampires and they just start killing them. It is actually more graphic than, like, it maybe should have been. There's a bit where she, like, slits someone's throat and then, like, something else happens to someone else. I think there's a bit of shooting that goes on. But that whole scene is just lots of vampire killing, you know, quite, like, straightforward. And really, that's the story. I believe there was a bit in it where Matthew gets injured and there's a moment where Catherine can hear him screaming but can't get to him, and so she's like, oh my god, he's dead. And the sort of moral of the story, with it being from her perspective, is that living that life, you're very much living on the edge. And therefore, again, she should be glad for every moment she has alive because they never know what's around the corner. So yeah, that was how I got the living on the edge into that, and, you know, I didn't win with that one. Which isn't surprising. I did come third, to be fair, but yeah, not surprised that one didn't do as well. The last one, however, I was incredibly surprised that it did well. I thought this one wouldn't even get shortlisted, and that is my year 11 short story that was called The End of Land. So, The End of Land, right? I didn't want to enter the competition in year 11, but my English teacher at the time was kind of pressuring me into it, and she was like, oh, you know, it's your last year, you should enter it, you know, like nobody else is, they need people to do it, you should do it. And in the end I was kind of like, oh, okay, I'll do it, because I wasn't really interested. The theme that year, I had absolutely no idea how I was going to get around it. The theme for year 11 was living on the border. The reason it was living on the border is because Berwick-upon-Tweed is the border town between England and Scotland, so it was very much supposed to be about living on the border between England and Scotland, but I didn't want to write about that, obviously, but I couldn't find a way around it because that's quite an obvious one. You know, living on the edge can be interpreted as, you know, living on the edge as in, like, metaphorically, like, oh, you know, your life's hard, or it could literally be living on the edge. I almost wrote a story where they lived on the edge of a cliff. Like, you can interpret living on the edge in so many different ways. Whereas living on the border, I was struggling a bit more with it because it was so obviously supposed to be the Scottish border. So because I wasn't overly interested in writing the story, I just thought I would like make it as bizarre and stupid as I could, and basically wrote one very long joke. And it won. But the thing is, it wasn't just surprising when it won, it was actually kind of horrifying that it won, which I will explain in a minute. Basically, The End of Land is about two teenage boys who are part of a team fighting aliens, and these aliens attack a beach near Berwick, because it still had to be around the Berwick area. It starts with these two boys who I believe were called Beau and Julian. They're both standing on a beach with their shoes in the water, waiting for these aliens to descend, basically, and the beginning is them very quickly talking about things and what they're going to do when it happens, and there's a very quick recap of how they ended up there, about how the town of Berwick was told that aliens are going to be landing on the beach, and, you know, there's going to be this whole apocalypse and things, and the town needs to pick people to go and do it, and so volunteers came forward to work on the team to fight the aliens, and Beau and Julian both signed up for that team. So this is, like, explained in the story, and then we have very quick conversations between Beau and Julian, where I wanted to very quickly show that there's some sort of relationship between them, just through small gestures, because I was trying to build something so people were connected to them as characters for what comes on later. So I sort of subtly threw in ways to kind of hint at the fact that they are supposed to be in a relationship, and they're having this conversation on the beach about how, you know, they don't know if anybody's going to make it out alive because these aliens are about to descend from the sky, and then the aliens do descend from the sky. This is when it all gets a bit stupid because, like I mentioned, I wasn't particularly bothered. I was just writing it as a joke, and in this bit, the aliens then descend and they're all tentacle alien monster things, and they like hit the water, and there's so much description of tentacles because I was just having an absolute laugh with it. And there's like all of these like tentacle monsters like swimming about in the sea, and then they're like attacking people and it's all like really stupid. And I filled it with as many like, not innuendos, but like, you know, those words that just sound bad no matter like how you use them. You know, words like moist, penetrate, thrust, words like that just always have some sort of meaning to them no matter how you're trying to use them, because it was just an absolute laugh. So the rest of the story is tentacle monsters fighting humans and killing humans, and it all takes place from the perspective of one of the boys. So Beau is fighting these aliens, and at this point him and Julian have been separated, and they're busy doing their own thing, fighting the aliens, you know, batting away tentacles with, I don't know, swords or whatever. And this all builds up to Beau being kind of knocked over and Julian saving him, but by the time he stands up, Julian has already run across the beach and he's kind of being cornered by aliens. The end of the story is Beau running across the beach as fast as he can, trying to get to Julian before the aliens get to him, and it's a very long sequence of him like running and like the tension like builds, and then one of the aliens kills Julian, and the story ends with Beau leaning over his very dead body, thinking to himself about how none of that would have happened if they hadn't volunteered to join this team. And the way that I got the theme of living on the border in is that they are very much living on the border of life and death, and Beau thinks about this and thinks about how they really had no idea going into it who would survive and who wouldn't, because they were just really playing on that line between life and death. And again, that is how the story ends. Just like that. Dead people. The story does end a little bit better. It's like slightly bittersweet. He kind of has this thought to himself and he's like, oh, you know, Julian's dead, you know, if this wouldn't have happened, you know, we picked this life, these are things that we got ourselves into. But then he realises when he turns around that the rest of the aliens have been dealt with by the rest of the team. So it's kind of like a bittersweet ending because the aliens have been defeated, but at what cost? Like I said, that one wasn't actually supposed to win anything because it is so ridiculous. It was like, the connection to the theme was, for a start, very, very vague. I was like really testing the limits there. But then also just the whole theme of like tentacles and alien fights, and the entire thing was written to be one long joke. It was horrific. It was like, it wasn't even well written because I was just having a laugh with it. Like, oh, they want me to enter, I'll give them this, haha, kind of thing. And then it won. I don't know why it won. There must be some good reason that it won, but like I can't think of it. And the reason that this was slightly horrifying to me is that what I didn't mention earlier is that all of the short stories that won were put into a book that was then put into the independent bookstores in Berwick, which were frequently bought by the sort of elderly of the town, which meant that all of the elderly people of Berwick were reading about my teenage boys fighting tentacle aliens. Like, at first time it wasn't even a good story, so it didn't make me look any good, but then also the sort of innuendo feel to the entire thing in a very inappropriate manner because it was about tentacle aliens just like, it really wasn't something I was glad had been put in a book for the elderly people of the town to read. But thankfully none of them know who I am. So now it's just very funny to look back on the fact that this stupid tentacle short story that I wrote, like, somehow won. It ended up in a book. So yeah, I very much hold The End of Land dear to me for that reason. But that is it. That is the 3 short stories I wanted to talk about today. I do have other ones, but I thought those are like the funnier ones, the best ones, especially because they were to do with that particular competition. That was the only 3 times I entered it. But that's all I have for now, thankfully. There's no more tentacle aliens to be discussed in this video. If you've ever wrote any funny short stories that you'd like to share, please do comment about it down below because I will be looking. But for now, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon. Bye!